Hi, I'm really excited to bring this Christ Revealed interview to you. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, with the people around you who see you, like, throwing yourself all in on this and going through a Bible and marking it up this way, what are they saying to you while you're doing this?
Well, so my wife was really, I think, encouraged. She wasn't a Christian herself either, but I think she was like really thinking, if this is true, I'd like to have my husband be in on it with me, So she was, I think, more encouraged. But she's always been, we were together 18 years. Neither one of us were a Christian at that time. So it's not as though I had ever even really felt any pressure at all from her, because she wasn't a Christian either. I think she was just more interested in God than I was. But my partners, they started to notice. So surveillance teams are very tight. There are 5 officers and a sergeant. We're in cars every day, and we're following bad guys all around Los Angeles County.
Right.
And they don't know we're following them because we think they've done a crime in our city, but we're not quite sure. Or they did it with somebody else. We don't know who the second person is. So we're just watching them long enough to identify them and get all this done, right? So we get to be very tight. You work long hours together, and you're always watching somebody. And if you're not on the eye watching the bad guy, you're on a perimeter waiting for the bad guy to go mobile. Right. So whenever I was on the perimeter, I was studying. And I was pretty close to being a Christian by the time a partner of mine caught me. And I remember I was backed up in my surveillance car in a terrible neighborhood, but I was in a funeral home. Usually funeral home parking lots are safe places to park your car and sit, right? So I'm backed up into a space, and I'm so engrossed in what I'm doing that I commit the biggest sin of any surveillance officer. I don't see him walk up on me. Because you got to be situational awareness. You have to know where you are, and you can't let guys walk up. That's how you get shot. So I was so entrenched, right, that I didn't hear him walk up. His name was Steve, and he walks up and gets behind me, and he sees I got a Bible and I've got some other materials on the seat next to me, and he says, "I knew it. I knew there was something different about you. Oh, don't tell me you're a Christian now." Because for years together, we had maligned Christians. We arrest a lot of Christians, okay? And we just would mock these guys, okay? We did this so much that everyone knew I was probably the most outspoken non-Christian on our team. And now here he catches me with this Bible on my lap, right? He says, "Oh, I know how you are," because he knew how adamantly opposed to Christianity I was. He says, I'll bet you being a pastor, because I know you. You're either all the way you hate it, or you're all the way in. And sure enough, he was right. It took several years for that to happen, but he it was I kind of ate my words for probably the rest of my career at that point. So and I've got people who eventually promoted to become my chief, my captains, my lieutenants. I stayed as a detective working these cases, and these guys knew me when I was a very committed atheist. Right. And they still, I just saw some yesterday. They went to an event at our agency, and sure enough, these guys are still saying, "Yeah, so you still preaching?" Because they think, it's such a joke that I went from one extreme to the other. So yeah, I had to take a little bit of abuse. That's okay.
Yeah, well, that's it's a great story, because I think it's one thing to say what kind of what your findings are. It's another thing to say what the experience is as you're having the findings.
And cops are so. At least I think we have a tendency to be so analytical about things that we never trust experiences. And you'll talk to witnesses who will try to ground what they're telling you based on an experience or based on how they felt about it. And that's so unreliable. And so we're always like, just the facts. If you've ever watched the old TV shows, just the facts, ma'am. So I think we are that way by nature. And so I was the kind of person who would have resisted any impulse to feel my way into this. I would have just resisted it. And I knew that if I was going to become a Christian, that I would be challenged by the other evidence case makers that I knew in my agency, that for years had watched me kind of belittle. Most of the Christians we met could not make a case for what they believed. And even the few officers we knew who were Christians could not make a case for what they believed.
Well, this is the other very fascinating point. You didn't get there, you didn't become a Christian by taking a leap of faith.
Right.
You took an intellectual path
that
led you there, which is counterintuitive to what you probably would have believed is the way that people find it.
I think the word faith is loaded, right? I mean, it's defined in a certain way by culture, and if you aren't careful, you don't realize that definition that people typically think of a faith is not a biblical definition of faith. So what I try to say to people is, look, every case you make for a jury has unanswered questions, and we actually even ask jurors before we start. We'll say, "Hey, are you the kind of person who needs every question answered before you can make a decision?" If you are, we're going to excuse you. You're not going to be on our jury panel because we're not going to be able to answer. We already tell you in advance that you're going to have open questions. This is the nature of every criminal trial. No one ever has the perfect evidence set that answers every possible question. So what we ask people to do is to make an informed decision, even though they're going to have to step across a gap of unanswered questions. Now we hope to make that gap as small as possible and make you as comfortable as possible stepping across it, but we know we're going to ask you to take a step of evidential trust. Now, you might describe that as a step of faith, but it's not a blind faith, and it's not an unreasonable faith.
Right.
It's what I would call a forensic faith. It's the idea here is that it is a faith that is grounded in an evidence trail that will never get you all the way there, but it'll get you close. You'll go in the right direction, and you're going to take a step across your unanswered questions. But a blind faith is one where you say, how can I? So, for example, an unreasonable belief is one that is you hold in spite of evidence to the contrary.
Right.
So you might think, for example, you get warts from frogs. Okay, you don't get warts from frogs. We already know what the science is behind this. We know that it doesn't happen that way. So if you hold that belief, you're holding it in spite of evidence to the contrary. That's an unreasonable belief. I don't believe that Christianity is that kind of belief. It's not. There is no evidence to the contrary that you can point out that says this is unreasonable. But you could say, well, yeah, but I think that faith is blind in the sense that isn't faith the thing you do when you don't have evidence? Isn't faith, well, that doesn't appear to be how Jesus saw it, because Jesus never operated that way. He continually said, hey, if you don't believe what I'm telling you, at least believe the evidence of these miracles I've worked in front of you. And when he always relied on evidence then when he had a doubt. So when John the Baptist sends his disciples to Jesus, hey, John sent us, he's in custody, he wants to know, are you the one? I get it, John's suffering, he's not sure now what's going on, he's got questions, he sends his disciples. Well, I think Jesus right then could have scolded John. Right. Because John is his cousin, raised by parents who knew each other. His mom knew Jesus' mom. But he doesn't do any of that. Instead, he works 3 miracles in front of John's disciples, says, go back and tell John what you just saw. That is an evidential approach, right? Because you could say, hey, you need to trust. You need to pray about it. You need to remember how you were raised. No, it doesn't do any of that. He says, okay, I'll give you a little more proof. Off you go. So I think that's really, it was valuable to me as a guy who was investigating this as somebody who loves evidence, that Jesus seemed to love evidence too. And that kind of faith is neither blind nor unreasonable. It's that, yes, he gets it. You're going to have some unanswered questions. You may have some doubts, but you've got more than enough good evidence to point you in this direction, and that little step you're going to take of trust is not unwarranted.
Thanks so much for joining us for this interview, for taking this Christ Revealed journey with us. Remember, if you haven't already, subscribe. That way you'll get notified about all the new content that's coming down the road. Comment. People want to hear from you, and then maybe you'll encourage somebody else to make a comment. If you did like it so other people know that it's something good for them to watch. And finally, share this. Send links to other people that you know and care about. Cost you nothing but maybe a few seconds of your time, but it might have a massive impact on their life. Anyway, really excited to be able to share this information with you. Thanks for tuning in.